I am absolutely shaking right now. My husband and I have known 3 years and have gotten married 6 months ago. He is perfect and everything I could have asked for. These past years I thought I had been living the dream, but now everything has fallen apart. 2 hours into our road trip, my husband decided to take a stop at a gas station and get us some snacks. I stayed inside the car and was waiting for him until I noticed he got a notification from Instagram. This surprised me because he was always adamant on never wanting to get Instagram. I opened up his phone and decided to check what it was. Upon opening it, I found messages with a teenage girl. I only saw a couple of them, but they consisted of, "I love you," "I can't wait to see you again," and him sliding on her stories saying she looks beautiful. I clicked on her profile and it was obvious she was a teenager, somewhere around 14, 16. The fact he was cheating on me didn't even register in my brain, and it was more so the fact that he was texting these things to someone underage. I did not have the chance to look further because he came back within 10 minutes. I don't know what to do. I am terrified, betrayed, and disgusted. I am stuck with him for 6 more hours and he is noticing I am acting weird. I don't want to confront him on the road and I feel like these hours are driving me crazy. I need to vent and need some support or something. Edit. I want to thank everyone for the replies and support. I have been faking being sick just to get him off my back as to why I am not holding his hand or be affectionate with him. I know I should go along with it and pretend for my sake, but I physically can't bring myself to. I'm going to try to take a nap as we have about 4 HRS left too. Truly taking everyone's advice to heart, and thank you for everyone taking your time. I just need to rest my brain before I do something I regret. Thankfully, we are on a trip to see my parents. So after these hours, I will truly feel safe. First, I want to thank everyone for the support and advice they gave. Like I said in my previous post, I just fell asleep during the car ride and told him I felt sick. We were heading to my parents' house and I really wanted to be by them. However, within 45 minutes my husband woke me up and told me he found a nearby hotel for us to stay in. He said he was worried about me and wanted me to rest in a real bed. He also bought medicine for me. At this point, I was freaking out because, no, I was in an unfamiliar area and he was being extra clingy. Once we got in the room and we laid down, he kept cuddling me and giving me kisses. It made me feel sick, and so I left to go to the bathroom, and I stayed in the bathroom for about an hour. I scrolled through everyone's comments and kept pacing myself about what to do. I knew my husband was growing concerned because he kept checking on me. After I left the bathroom, he looked so worried and I just needed to let everything out. I know the number one advice given was not to confront him, and I know it probably was a horrible move, but I couldn't take it. I told him I found his messages on Instagram. He immediately started apologizing and saying he wanted to tell me sooner but couldn't find the time. He was apologizing, but not as intensely as what he could have done. So I confronted him about that and said, "What a lousy apology coming from a pedophile." He immediately went silent. It was probably silent for about 6 minutes when he broke it and asked what I was referring to. I told him, and he looked so hurt. He took a deep breath and explained everything. He said the person I looked through his messages with was his 15-year-old daughter, Sarah. He explained that she reached out to him a year ago on Facebook, and ever since then was trying to connect with her. He said within 6 months he confirmed he was the father, met up with her a bunch of times, and truly formed a strong connection with her. However, 6 months ago we got married, and he didn't want to stress me out with that news, as well as his daughter not being ready to face others. He also explained that when he was 18 he had an on and off relationship with a Sarah's mom, when one day she just up and ghosted him forever. According to Sarah, her mom is also strict, which is why the message on Instagram to avoid her mom finding out right now. My mind was spiraling and I knew he knew that. He then placed his phone into my hand and let me scroll farther. Upon scrolling, I found her referring to him as Dad, and she sent him a happy Father's Day a while back as well. He even said he would do another DNA test to prove it to me. I immediately felt guilty. I feel guilty that my immediate mind took innocent texts and turned them inappropriate, and I felt guilty that I saw my husband in that way. I kept apologizing to him about the accusation. However, my husband just apologized and said he understood my point of view and told me it wasn't my fault. I kept trying to tell him I was sorry and he kept saying it was okay. I can see the look in his eyes though, and I can see how hurt he really is. He said we should both just get some sleep and talk more later. To be honest, I can't fall asleep as I feel just disgusted with myself. About his whole secret daughter, it doesn't bother me so much. Maybe BC it's miles better than the alternative. But I understand the situation and am happy for my husband because he wants kids desperately, but we have decided to wait 2 years to grow our marriage. I feel as if right now I flushed everything down the drain and have no clue how to make things better. Edit. To answer some common questions or concerns. To the people who think my husband sucks for not telling me earlier, he acknowledged that it was wrong, and through his apology I understand why he did it. I am slightly hurt, however, if I put myself in his shoes. Revealing a secret daughter would be hard and difficult. I don't take it as he doesn't trust me more of it's a delicate situation to bring up. To the people who think I suck for invading my husband's privacy and making rash assumptions, yes, that was horrible of me, and I take full accountability. My husband understands my point of view and doesn't blame me for rushing to conclusions. Although he is hurt, I could imagine him as that sort of person. Long story short, we both empathize with each other's actions. Yes, we both are hurt, but understand why the course of events played out this way. Thank you to all the comments, and IDK what kind of proof I can give LOL. But one thing I can assure you is that I did not steal this off of some TikTok and would like if anyone had the TikTok, I stole it from LMAO. I had posted a few times before on Reddit about my fiancé and I, about my not wanting kids, our engagement, the love we have for each other. For the most part, my posts have had happy endings, but this one just isn't a really happy one. Soon after my engagement, my best friend, since elementary school, and his wife passed away in a car accident, leaving behind their 11-year-old daughter, Amy, not real name. Amy is my goddaughter, but we do refer to each other as niece and Tia. I've been there for her whole life, and she has always been one of my favorite people, and still is. It's been a really hard several months since the accident, and everyone is having a tough time. I have spent most of my life with my best friend in it, then without him. Our parents are best friends, due to us being friends at first. I refer to his mom as Mama asterisk his last name asterisk, and Dad as Papa asterisk his last name asterisk, and he did the same with my parents. My siblings were his siblings. He was an only child. We went to events, concerts together a lot, so multiple times since he passed. I've subconsciously bought him a ticket, forgetting that he wouldn't be able to use it. I introduced him to his wife in high school. We were the only two openly nerdy cheerleaders at our school. They got pregnant young, and I was there to help, and I even went so far as to stop eating foods she couldn't eat because I could tell being pregnant was not fun for her. I was at the hospital because she was scared and asked me to be close by. I was the first non-blood family member to see Amy. I say all this because him and his family are indeed my family. So them passing was a huge hit for everyone, especially for Amy. And now the month when it happened, Amy went to stay with her grandparents. Luckily, we all stay in the same big city, so the farthest any one of the family is from the other is an hour at most, and that's mainly due to traffic. The issue, though, is that her grandparents are much older, 70s, compared to my parents, 50s. So while they do very much love her, they are already at that point where they themselves need help. Plus, they just lost their only son and daughter-in-law. Amy's mom's parents are out of state, and they also didn't believe moving her to them and away from everyone she knows was the right thing either. Her grandparents overall didn't think Amy staying with them was the best for her, and they relayed that to my parents, who then mentioned this to me. So after talking to my fiancé about it, as well as talking about it in therapy, which included me, my fiancé, and both our therapists, we came to the conclusion that we would be happy to take her in, since we are financially capable, have the space, and we do also just love her so much. Before the accident, she was realistically at our house at least 3 times a week. She is the reason why I even have an art room, since it was an activity we always did together. Even at 11, she's a fantastic artist. When we approached her grandparents, they were completely on board with the idea, and I do think that a part of them had hoped we would take her without them asking us directly, hence the comment to my parents. However, when we had broached the idea to Amy, she was hesitant. It turns out that she is aware that I never wanted kids and is afraid that I will hate her for having to raise her. It 100% broke my heart that she felt that way, and I tried everything to convince her that was wrong. In the end, I told her the truth. I will never be able to replace her mom or her dad, and I have no plans to. Her parents made me her godmother because they knew that I would love and care for Amy the way they loved and cared for her. I could never hate her. My fiancé even pointed out that I was the one who had the idea to foster her. But I also had to stress to her that this is a new situation for all of us. We are all grieving together and we are all jumping into this new living situation together. So there will be mistakes, but there will also be a lot of love. We also put her in therapy, which she has been very hesitant about, but after finding out that my fiancé and I are both regularly in therapy, she felt a lot more comfortable. My fiancé has been great through all this, and my absolute rock. He was also very close to my best friend. My best friend was going to be his groomsman, and was the second person my fiancé asked after he asked his brother to be the best man. My best friend was the type of person who will see something and say, "This looks like something so-and-so would like, so I'm going to buy it for them." So some days I will catch my fiancé staring at one of those many gifts for a long time, or he will say something like, "I hope they both knew how much I love them." We hold each other tighter now when we hug and kiss longer than before. When I asked about Amy living with us, my fiancé was shocked and wasn't sure how he felt since change was happening lightning fast with the engagement, then the accident, and now with Amy. So I didn't bring it up again until he did a week later with, "I thought about it, and I think it would be good for all of us, but let's get our therapist together to make sure we aren't jumping the gun because we love her." Amy moved in right after Thanksgiving. All the families got together for the holidays with her to remind her that she is never alone. She has her mom's family, out of state but they call often. Her dad's family, my fiancé's family, out of the country too, minus my fiancé's brother plus his wife. And let's not forget all our friends and their families. There was a lot of crying, but a lot of laughing too. Her living with us is a huge adjustment, but nothing we can't handle. She has always been a sweet girl and very bubbly and loud. Since the accident, she obviously has been a lot more withdrawn and quiet. But I am seeing sparks of herself come back briefly and slowly. We had to switch her therapist a few times, but this current one is definitely helping a lot. Amy really likes her too. Her grades did slip a bit, but my fiancé has made it a point to do homework with her every day, and it made her cry the first few times he did it. He asked her if she wanted him to stop, but it turns it that it just reminded her of her dad, so it really meant a lot that her Tio was so willing to help her too. I was expecting some rebelling, but that hasn't happened, yet LOL. Actually, she has been doing the absolute most. She would clean up after us before we had a chance to do it ourselves, or try to do things for us that seemed a little out of character. After some prodding, it turns out it was because she is afraid we would get rid of her if she upset us or did something wrong. We have stressed that in no way has that even crossed our minds. We are here for her, and, unless she wants nothing to do with us, we will continue to be here for her through the good and bad. But let me tell you, I cried so much that night feeling terrible that she felt that way. I want her to know that our love is unconditional. And it always has been. We are also in the process of setting up a trust for her. Her parents left behind money. And there is money coming in from their insurance policies too, so all that is going in that trust for her. I will also help supplement this trust, plus my fiancé, even though I stressed that he doesn't need to. Neither myself or my fiancé will touch this trust. When she turns 18, she will have access to use the money for college if she decides to go, and a set amount will be available every month to live on. If she decides not to go, then she will still have access to a set amount every month. Side note, we would prefer she go to college and will encourage it, but her dad didn't go to college and did well as an artist, and we see that she has his talents, so we just want to be supportive of any decision she makes. When she turns 21, she will have access to the full trust to use as she wishes, but we will do our best to ensure she is responsible with it when the time comes. At the end of the day, she will be an adult, and we have to trust she will be responsible when she has access to the money. I also want to say we didn't come to this decision on our own. We consulted with all 4 sets of grandparents, and this was what we all thought was the best approach, as well as help from a lawyer. When Amy is a little older, we will discuss this with her, but for now she's still so young and dealing with a lot. Some nights I sleep with her in bed, with my fiancé sleeping on the floor by the bed, because she cries herself to sleep and she feels so alone. I don't know if that feeling will go away anytime soon. I think about how I'm in my 30s and I still can't imagine not having my parents, so I really have no idea what she is feeling. Best I can hope for is that I can help the pain just a little bit. Yeah, Amy's mom was going to be my bridesmaid and I was going to have Amy be the flower girl, but I think I'm going to ask Amy if she would prefer to be my bridesmaid. Amy looks so much like both her parents and I see so much of their personalities in her. A part of me feels like having her up there with me will make me feel like her parents are up there with me too. And I never once imagined getting married without either of them by my side. All planning stopped the moment of the accident for that reason, and even now typing this has me crying that they won't actually be there. But also that's a lot of pressure to put on Amy. I don't want to tell her all that. I do want to give her the option to be my bridesmaid if she wants, and if she doesn't want to, then that's also okay, because she is still going to be part of my wedding. I won't even bring this up for a while because I still am not in the headspace to plan the wedding right now. There is no real reason why I'm posting this. I tried a couple times to write out what happened, but each time I broke down or deleted it. I think I just want to vent or just feel better. Maybe to get validation that we are doing the right thing and not messing Amy up. One step at a time, I guess. It's been a while and people keep reaching out to check in, which I sincerely appreciate, so an update might be warranted. It won't be exciting at all, LOL, just where we are all at right now. Side note, I wasn't sure if I gave my fiancé a name in my previous posts, but I will refer to him as David moving forward, and my best friend's name moving forward is Leo. First, I want to thank this community for the kind words of encouragement and concern for Amy. It's heartwarming, to say the very least, to receive such support from strangers. There were so many comments that I got very overwhelmed and stopped responding, but I read every single one, and even if I didn't respond, I truly appreciate every single one of you. I just get really shy after a certain point, even though this is all anonymous, lol. Second, a lot of people were really focused on the trust. I commented on my previous post about it, so I'll add it here. Trust me, we are aware that 21 is still mentally really young, haha. We consulted with all the grandparents regarding the trust, and most of them wanted to give her a lump sum at 18. The compromise was that the lump sum would be given at 21 with her having a sort of allowance from 18, 21. I will also have her set up with our lawyer and financial advisor when she turns 18, plus myself, plus fiancé will always do our best to guide her. But she will be an adult at that point, so all we can do is give her all the tools to help make the best decisions for herself when the time comes. We can always change the rules of the trust if need be, but that is something that will be decided as a family. Right now, we are happy with where we landed. Now, onto the update. David is my husband now. One night we were talking, and we just didn't feel comfortable having the wedding this year, but we also didn't want to wait to be married. Life is short. So we went to the courthouse with Amy to make it official. We will be having the wedding next year to make it official, LOL. We are all still in therapy, both individual and family. We are also in a support group for children who have lost parents, and Amy seems to be doing really well in. Amy is now 12. It was her first birthday without her parents, so I wish I could say it was an extremely happy occasion. This year has been a lot of firsts without them, and we will continue to have a lot of firsts without them. But she swears that despite crying a lot of the day, understandably, she wouldn't have been able to plan the day better herself. So a bittersweet success. Special mention, Amy has a best friend of 5/6 years, Monica, who I've known since she was 7. Monica is lovely. She's a bit sarcastic, which I find hilarious, and is a kind soul. According to Amy, she tried to distance herself from Monica because she felt like she was too sad to be around and didn't want to be a burden. Monica bussed herself over to our house and basically told Amy to knock it out, and that she decides when Amy is too much, which will apparently never happen because Amy is her favorite person. I was always Team Monica, but that day solidified the fact that I would ride at dawn for her. We ended up getting Amy 2 rabbits as well. Why rabbits, you ask? Well, her parents' nickname for her was Bunny, and we were already planning on getting some kind of animal companion, So we landed on bunnies. Plus, our state has an overwhelming number of rabbits, and most get euthanized due to overpopulation, so they need all the love they can get. Why, too? Bunnies are social creatures and are happiest being raised with another rabbit. Amy is obsessed with paint and chalk, haha. After showing her the ropes and doing her own research, she has completely taken over any and all care for them, despite us offering several times. She even has a space in the fridge labeled buns for the fresh greens that she cuts up every morning to give them. She decorated an area in her room for them because they will be in her room at night. But they are allowed to venture around the house during the day, after we spent a full day bunny-proofing. Amy's been very happy with them. And Paint even sleeps on the bed with her now, with Chalk only sometimes sleeping with her. It also means we are no longer sleeping in her room with her, and only a handful of times has she crawled into bed with us, like on Mother's Day and Father's Day. We are leaving for a trip to Europe, Asia next week. David and I love to travel, but I actually start to get irritable when I don't travel for a while. David jokes that I always need my fix, lol. It's a 3-week trip starting in Poland to spend time with David's family for a week, and then to Asia from there. The plan was for Amy to be with us for the full 3 weeks, but she really pushed back, and we were confused about that. She only wants to go for the first week in Poland to meet David's family. Side note, his family adore her and has planned a "you're stuck with us forever" party for her. Whenever we asked about the rest of the trip, she said she didn't want to go and that we should go without her. If she didn't want to do something, we get it and don't want to force her. Understanding the why was tough for me. Does she not like traveling? No, she enjoys it. Is she afraid? No, she likes flying and thinks it's cool to see new places. Is it too much time away from home? No, she's cool with long trips. So why doesn't she want to go? She just doesn't. In family therapy, the trip came up. Finally, her reason for not wanting to join us on the rest of the trip came up. She feels like David and I are prioritizing her too much and taking her feelings into account more than we should. She feels like we aren't prioritizing our relationship or even our other friends or family. She feels like she's preventing us from doing stuff because we keep thinking about her first. I want to make this very clear. While David and I are prioritizing her more and 100% take her feelings into account when we plan things, we still very much prioritize each other. We have a date night every week. If we do cancel, we make up for it. Our date nights did stop for a few months after Amy moved in with us, but that was just because we needed to adjust. She spends the night at Monica's every week, and that's usually when we do date night, and we do the same for Monica's mom every week. We also go to the gym together every morning. I'm not a morning person, but I am for David. And we communicate throughout the day. But she made a very good point about our friends and other family. It's been hard to balance a kid in the mix, and we have been a little neglectful. Sure, our closest friends' family usually just come over to our house and aren't shy about being themselves around Amy, but there are events that we have missed by prioritizing Amy. I'm not saying that we made the wrong choice, but she highlighted that we need to start taking care of our other relationships now that she feels safer with us. Amy really is the greatest kid. Even though it hasn't been a full year since they have passed, she has changed so much. I wish she didn't have to grow up as fast as she did, and I hope we can preserve some of her childhood, but I know her parents would be so proud of her. I'm so damn proud of her. We tell her all the time, but I really don't think she grasps just how proud we all are of her. Anyways, haha, we still stressed we would love to have her on the trip with us, but she said we should have that time for ourselves. So we decided to leave this trip as is. My parents will come with us for that first week in Poland, and they will fly back home with Amy, with her floating between all the grandparents, while David and I are traveling. We will video call her every day to check in. We are already making more of an effort with our friends and family. Amy is also spending more nights with her many grandparents, which she has been loving because I'm really lucky that I have 4 nanas and 4 papas. David is absolutely killing the parent role too. He has been more hands-on with Amy's schooling. He's the one who has been handling teacher, school stuff, and pickups. I do drop-offs. He has the contact information and has made better connections with the other parents of all the kids in her class, plus all her friends' parents. He's been joking about joining the school's version of the PTA, but I don't think he's joking, LOL. He's definitely the extrovert of the two of us, so it isn't surprising. I could probably go on for pages and pages about David just being the absolute best, but I already feel like this update is super long, haha. I don't know how I would have done any of this without his love and support. While neither one of us is perfect, we are perfect for each other. It's honestly crazy to me that I can still love him more and more each day. Like, how is that actually even physically possible to love someone this much? Is this even healthy? I digress, lol. I think I'm doing okay. Just like Amy is dealing with a lot of firsts without her parents, so am I. At first I didn't think it was fair for me to even grieve since Amy's situation is just on a whole other level than my own. But my therapist had to remind me not to compare my grief with hers because it is just different. I sometimes imagine what my conversation with Leo would have been like if I told him I'm adopting this 11-12-year-old girl because her parents were my closest friends. He always understood why I didn't want kids, and he was so supportive about it when others disregarded my feelings. I wonder if he would have talked me out of it or if he would have encouraged me to do it. He 100% would have been part of the village of people supporting me whether he agreed with my decision or not. I just wish I knew what his thoughts would be about this whole thing. Sigh. I miss them both so damn much. But I'm also really lucky to have David and Amy. I don't know who said it, but they said it best. If you want the rainbow, you gotta put up with the rain.
I'm a single man in my early 30s. I've got a brother who's 29, and he's already got 4 kids now. He had his first at 22, and the second followed a year later. Then the third 2 years after that, and the fourth is the most recently born a couple months ago. His wife, my Sil, and I do not get along as she always likes to try and get a rise out of me by acting superior. Then turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen if I retaliated against her in any way. She can cry in an instant and can put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is and just don't care. She's very good looking, I'll give her that. But she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day. So their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house. And privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them under one roof in a 3-bedroom house that was built in the 60s. Growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We are 3 years apart in age, but he developed a superiority complex because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way back then. It was obvious my parents cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything unless people called them out on it. Which did happen a fair bit by other members of family, which is why my parents packed us all up and moved us about 150 miles away from them, so they generally would only see us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My brother got physically abusive towards me on a number of occasions, flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point she broke up with me, and laughed at any misfortune I had. And my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equal to my brother on birthdays and Christmas, because other people were present. We had relatives that were very nosy and loved gossiping drama. So my parents did their best to hide what was really going on, and threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out, but couch surfing was far better than living with them. I was low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I really didn't care. From that point on, I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays, like the rest of the family. The start 2020 pandemic was not kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease on the condo because my roommate also lost his job, and neither of us could afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff because I was soon going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive, but I liked living the high life, until that life wasn't kind to me, and I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper so I could have saved more money to fall back on. But I had a plan. I own a truck simply for the fact that I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck just so I could live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside as well. But when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they told me they had a full house and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid them basically what it'd cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much of my unemployment money as I could till I could find a new job. I may as well be living in an apartment with that rent price they were asking. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement, and still thought it was absolutely hilarious I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing at and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck and camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night that I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say, I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go, as any other relatives that owned houses were fairly far away, and all my friends were all apartment people, and I was pretty attached to my area as well, so I didn't want to just leave. I'd also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail anymore. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try and find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. In that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and drug addicts to people demanding I leave because my camper was an eyesore. At one point, someone who told me to move claimed to be with an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses, and when I questioned what HOA, they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway just to avoid the trouble. In order to have a steady supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord to plug in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging it into an outside outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know that's a crumby thing to do, but I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank for recharging my phone, but I didn't have anything like a generator, and generators are noisy and require fuel anyway. So I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to the neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I worked retail while in college and promised myself never again, though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money, but I had no stable place to live while receiving it, and I didn't want to still be jobless when it ran out. Plus, I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep note of where I could park and what local public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old employee parking spaces. Literally no one else seemed to bother using because they were so far in the back that the area was borderline forgotten. My boss, company owner, actually liked this arrangement because I was willingly available to take any shift I could get, so long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us about it. The entire time I lived back there, I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time when they needed me, and was working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment or at my local gym as the camper didn't have a shower in it and only a portable toilet. And I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore. So I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse and could go in to use the bathroom there at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard. He's since become one of my closest friends. The camper was easy to heat in the winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun, though. The camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay and hands-on learned some new skills from other employees. Eventually, midway into this year, I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work, and just 2 miles away found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property. But I managed to get it for $10K less than the asking price somehow. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off to set it up in the backyard. So I put it there as its own little building just in case I want to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on my book of faces. My family saw the post, and that's where this shit really starts. After a few weeks, my parents and brother along with his family came to visit completely unannounced to have a tour of my home. I didn't even give them my address. So how they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members visited me before that. So I wonder if they stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically all shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists. Then just started making themselves at home. They all kept poking around, and SEL had this creepy smirk that she was repeatedly flashing me. And it was only later that I figured out why. And it made me madder than a bull on steroids that just got stung by a hornet. My parents were constantly talking about how I've got so much extra space now, and it's too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now, but maybe someday. And my brother kept remarking about how there was more space than our parents' house, and my house was closer to his job, too. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually, my brother asked me to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and piled out onto the front porch. That's what finally made me realize they'd planned something. My brother, let's call him Dan for the sake of simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone, and I should let him move in with his family because his wife is pregnant with kid number 4, and my house is much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already have the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they live in the main house. And I'd like to point out that Dan never once spoke of offering rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He also started talking about how there would be changes, and even curfews, and that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't my brother, I'd think the person I was talking to had lost their mind. But Dan lost his marbles long ago thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house, or parts of my house, to him. Other people maybe, just so I can pay the mortgage off more easily. But certainly not him, or his nasty wife. I've heard of this exact kind of situation in videos online many times, and never once did I think I'd actually live it because I thought it so ludicrous. But my parents, brother, and SL do all fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic, entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording, then just held onto it. Dan didn't even seem to care or notice that I'd done this, and just sat there with his arms waving around while talking about all the reasons of why he needed my house. Then went from saying that to acting like it was a done deal and trying to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said, "Hell no!" And I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backward for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him on that level, because I was punished by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can be as shiny as it wants here. I stood up and then told him that my house was not up for grabs, and acting like I'll let him move in just because they want it won't make it happen. I bought my house for me, and it's not my fault he keeps having more kids and has to keep living with our parents because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could without actually touching me and said that I didn't deserve the house, and he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face and said that was total bullshit because I worked hard to be able to buy my house. Of course I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids and I don't need all the space, so I may as well give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything, and he never even offered to pay me rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in my own house. Then Dan told me that he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our parents said I was going to do this, and that I will. I yelled, as if their word was law or something, and told Dan that they did not have the right or power to give my house to him. Then right one cue, my parents and Sil barged back in through the front door and surrounded me to try and force me to agree. There was a lot of fighting. But to sum it up, from this point on, I heard the line, "Just do it for Dan," way more times than I can remember. In the fight, I told them all they don't have a say in my life or my house, and to get out before I called the cops. Sil screamed the loudest at me about how she was pregnant again, and I can't do this to her. I said I did nothing to her. She just assumed she could take from me like I would just allow it. I had no obligation to her or her family. Then I called her a stuck-up bitch who never had any respect for me. So I don't care what she thinks or how many kids she has. I have no sympathy for her. She won't be living in my house. Well, that made her angry enough to attack me. She got in one good hit on my face and tried to do more, but my brother held her back, kicking and screaming. She kept demanding he let her go so she could scratch my eyes out. The phone I was holding recorded pretty much everything, so I held it up and said I was going to call police if they didn't leave right away. My parents told Dan they were leaving. Then my mother said that I had a week to come to my senses. I told her I won't be, and to not come back. Then I told Sil that my phone recorded everything, and if she tries anything, I'll press charges for assault. She screamed at me, and then stormed out loudly, crying with her face in her hands. My mother was the last one out the door and said that I better do this for Dan and Sil. I responded by telling her I won't be. After I kicked my parents, brother, and Sil out for trying to force me to hand over my new house to my brother, I immediately went to my social media and told the story to the whole family. It spread pretty fast, but you won't find it now because it all got deleted some time ago, and I put my own profile on private. I posted about it because I knew that the first thing my family would do when they got home is try to twist the event to make me the villain. And I was exactly right. But I had about an hour to get started before them, and I had video evidence to back up my story about what they'd done. No, I don't plan on showing the video here, so don't ask. Being preemptive worked because I got a fair number of family members on my side right away. My parents, brother, and Sil must have been all set to write their own post, but it was too late, so they didn't even bother trying to lie much. My parents, Dan and Sil, had a few flying monkeys supporting them, but not much else. Plenty of others knew how entitled they already were. So what happened was something they all quickly understood and accepted. There was one person in particular that called me. I don't know who they were, but they ranted at me that I was a horrible brother, and I needed to make way for a real family man. I just ended the call and blocked the number. This didn't repeat. The week went by, and my parents showed up with Dan at my front porch just like they said they would in their prior ultimatum. They rang my doorbell like crazy and also pounded on the door until I finally answered. I opened it just a crack, and they tried to shove their way in again. But I'd installed a couple of latch chains that prevented it, and even braced my body against the door for good measure. My father and brother demanded I let them in, but I said I was recording everything on camera and would call the police if they tried to force their way in again. My mother calmed them down, and then in her most sickly sweet tone, asked me if I was ready to let my brother move in. I told her and the rest of them to fuck off and never come back. My mother put on the crocodile tears and asked me why I can't just do this for Dan because he's my beloved brother. I laughed and then bluntly said I do not love him as a brother because he treated me like shit for years and they only encouraged him to do so. They are terrible parents, and he is a terrible brother. Then told them to leave or I'd be calling police ASAP. They all left surprisingly easily, apart from my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dirty looks. One could say making them leave was suspiciously easy. I thought the whole mess was over, but I guess I should have taken them more seriously, because they had other stupid plans. I came home later that week on Friday evening to find a moving truck and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family there moving stuff in. He just waved to me with a shit-eating grin when I saw him. I was furious and told him and the rest of his family to stop. But Sil smugly said to me that, like it or not, they were moving in. And then, in the most fake way while tilting her head and puckering her lips, she said that it was okay because my mommy allowed it, and I should always listen to what my mommy tells me. I seethed with rage just hearing those words and looking at her smug, bitchy face, so locked myself in my truck to call the cops right away. When they realized what I was doing, SL started pounding on my window and yelling at me to stop, and that I can't do this to her because she and Dan need the house, and she cried, "Why can't you just do this for Dan?" I responded with, "Fuck Dan, it's my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police. All of which the 911 operator heard thanks to the window being slightly open. I told Sil if she damaged my truck I'd sue her, and she was smart enough to retreat. When the police arrived, Dan and Sil along with their kids had locked themselves in my house. I told cops what had happened, as well as showing them my new driver's license that had my current address on it. Then, when we went to my front door, I saw that they'd changed the lock, and the old lock was laying on the porch with the center of it drilled out, and the drill they used was laying right next to it, with a complete Harbor Freight drill bit set. Could they have been any more stupid leaving evidence out like that? I pointed out the broken lock and drill, then gave the police a rundown on all the events that happened prior. Well, I guess Dan called our parents over at some point after I arrived home, because they showed up while I was talking to the cops. My parents immediately lied and started saying that I'd agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I said that was an easily provable lie one way or another. So Dan and CL finally came out of my house with some papers in hand. They both looked super smug, like they'd somehow outsmarted me. They'd actually drawn up and printed out a fake rental agreement, but my signature was not on it. There was one, but it looked nothing like my handwriting. I don't think any of them have ever actually seen my signature, so that was incredibly stupid on their part. I told my parents and Dan that was stupidly blatant fraud, and if the cops investigated, they'd easily figure that out. And I don't think going to jail and court would do them any good. It could even make Dan lose his job, which is his only means of providing for his family. I also said I would get a lawyer and sue for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken, and I'd call CPS too for good measure. Dan went white and looked really scared when I said all that, but my mother got between us and doubled down about how I should just do this for Dan and live in the damn camper so they can finally have a family home to themselves. I yelled at her that if she thought it was such a good idea, she could do it for Dan herself and let Dan have her house to himself instead. The cops separated my mother from me, and I said I wanted them all out right now, or I'll press charges. I stated in a shout about how they drilled out my front door lock to break in. The lease papers were obvious fakes. They badly forged my signature, and I have recorded video of SIL attacking me. Those are felonies I could fuck over their lives with if I wanted, and if they didn't leave, that's exactly what I'd do. The only reason I hadn't already was for the sake of Dan's kids, so they have one chance to get the fuck out. The moment my parents heard that, I think it finally clicked that they could not force me to do it for Dan. My mother surrendered and said she'd put an end to this. Then she went over to Sael and spoke with her quietly for a minute while my father spoke to Dan. Sael instantly started loudly crying and ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell them to pick up the bits of paper, or he'd cite them for littering. Both of the cops at this point had the "I don't get paid enough for this" looks on their faces. Dan had to start telling his kids to load their stuff back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing that he won't get his own room now. Sil and Dan gathered their kids up to try and make one last pathetic attempt to guilt me with the sad family routine. You know, where they all gather together in a sort of group hug while all facing one direction. I swear, I think they'd practiced it beforehand. All of the kids had the same pleading look with quivering mouths. Sil kept rubbing her pregnant belly and tilting her head to look like a sad puppy, and my brother just made the saddest face he possibly could and said, "Please don't do this. We need to be able to live here." But I didn't falter and told them to keep packing. All the kids and Sil turned the crying up to 11, and Dan yelled at me, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You've denied us a home because you're too selfish to share and help out family?" I ended up laughing like a maniac and retorting that what he was trying to do was taking, not sharing. And no amount of crying will make me let his family move in because he's no brother of mine anymore. He's just an entitled prick who thinks he can take whatever he wants from me, like when we were kids. Dan started F-bombing me until the cops told him to cool it, or he'd be in cuffs regardless if I wanted to press charges. He sucked in his lips and looked a mix of afraid and supremely pissed off. I asked the cops if they could stick around until my parents, brother, and Sil had all left, and they said they had no intention of going anywhere until this had been resolved. In fact, in the next few minutes, 2 cops became 4 as more drove in for whatever reason. That gave my parents some extra incentive to get moving. I made Dan give me the keys to the new lock he'd put on my front door, though I got another lock the next day anyway because I didn't know if he had copies of the keys or not. He was really reluctant to hand them over. Then instead of handing them to me, he actually threw them down the street and into a storm drain while saying to go get them myself. But one of the cops scolded him for that and made him go get them. He had to pull the grate off just to get at them, and he got pretty dirty in the process. When he got the keys back, he just grumbled, then slammed them down into my hand. I then told them all to leave and never come back. My mother said I'd be disowned for this, as if that were some kind of threat to me, and I voiced that to them. Then, in an overly sarcastically, I said something along the lines of, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with you guys where I always get treated like shit by you all anyway. Because Dan has always been your obvious favorite. You treated all me so badly when I was growing up that if Dan ever needs an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything. So do like you always told me to do when I was mistreated by all of you and suck it up." My parents were floored after I said all of that, and the quartet of cops were looking pretty judgmental at them as well. I tell you, if you want to put nasty parents like mine on the spot, confront them in front of cops. Because they'll likely not try anything really stupid then. My mother just started crying and walking away. My father just stood there looking like he wanted to hit me. And Dan just held his kids in defeat. Oh, and Sil was off having a tantrum in my front lawn. Soon enough, they all formed a line handing out boxes and got their stuff out of my house. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so it all was taken out pretty quickly. But while doing it, my mother kept saying it wasn't too late, and I could still do it for Dan several times, each time trying to bargain more and more to try to make me change my mind. She said that Dan could pay me rent if I let them stay. And when that didn't work, she said I could move back in with them to let Dan rent my house, so I wouldn't have to share the building. I told her to shut up and keep packing boxes because I don't want Dan or his family around. I don't want his money, and I certainly don't want to live with him or my parents ever again after the way they treated me when I was a kid. Making a deal with my parents would be like making a deal with the devil to me. Sil ended up having another tantrum after hearing that and threw a box down, then sat on the ground to have a pity party because she didn't want to go back to sharing a house with my parents. and she just sat looking angry, sad there until everyone else was finished. She didn't even want to get up when it was time to leave. They finally got everything out of the house and into the truck. So before they left, I laid into my parents one last time about all of the shit they put me through growing up. And with 4 cops being right there, they couldn't do much other than stand there and take it for once. I called them out on so many things that happened, and even pointed out how they couldn't just do something nice for me, like letting me stay over with my camper when I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet. How they let Dan and Sile ridicule me and call me a bum. Well, who's the bum now? They wanted to kick me out of my own house so Dan could stay in it free of charge. Yet when I needed a place to go, they wanted to gouge me for more than I could afford just to park my camper when they knew I was out of the job. There were more extremely judgmental stares from the cops when I said all of that. So I put my parents on the spot one more time and asked them what I ever did other than being born to deserve being treated so badly. Because when I finally have a bit of success in life, they want to snatch it away from me for their favorite child since they'd rather I give everything to Dan and have nothing for myself. I bought my house using the money that I earned. I owed them nothing, and I won't be asking anything from them ever again, because clearly I will never be anything more than a doormat or a cash cow in their eyes. I got no answers from them. They just stood there looking like fish out of water. So I continued ranting and asked them what in God's name made them think they were such good parents after all of that. My father was beet red, but more from embarrassment than anger this time. And my mother was crying that she was a horrible person. I bluntly agreed that she is a horrible person. They all are, and I bet they'll go to hell for it too. They were shitty people, and they all knew it. But if I'd called them out on all this stuff in private instead of in public, they'd just get mad at me and still act like I'm in the wrong. They'd just kept up the denial for so long that it became a part of who they are. My mother buried her face in my father's jacket to cry. And my father looked more defeated than I've ever seen him. Dan and his family avoided me entirely as they finished putting everything back in the moving truck. I made sure nothing of mine was stolen. Not that I'd had a chance to get much furniture yet. I was lucky to even have a couch at that time. They all got back in their vehicles, and Sael just stood staring at me with malice until my brother finally got her to drive the minivan home. And as soon as they were all gone, I got back online again and spilled the beans what happened. My parents were too embarrassed to even try and defend their actions this time. And while the family was somewhat split before this incident, it was now a landslide in my favor. Nearly all of the family has sided with me after this incident, and those who haven't simply aren't siding with anybody. No matter how much my parents previously tried the "we did it for Dan" line, no one listened anymore. So any remaining familial support they had is now gone. Many in the family who I expected wouldn't side with me did. That includes the former flying monkeys. So I guess they've finally had enough. Around that time, I offered to host half the family at next Christmas Eve in my new house. My parents were not invited. I wasn't blocked on my brother and Sil's profiles, surprisingly. And I saw Sil had her 4th baby in early November. They are still living with my parents. I'm pretty sure they knew I was watching because Sil kept making passive-aggressive posts every couple of weeks or so about not having enough space while living with my parents. Probably to see if she can still guilt me. And I'm sure it's driving my mother and father up the wall because they aren't getting any peace and quiet in their old age, with 3 rowdy, obnoxious kids, a mentally unstable CL, my golden child brother, and a newborn baby in the house all at once. Perhaps they could move into a camper in their own backyard and let Dan take over their house completely. They might get some peace then. Yeah, they could do that for Dan. I think my husband fathered his best friend's children, and now one of them is attracted to my daughter. This began as a dark, intrusive thought that I could never shake off, and over the years it has bloomed into a poison flower that infects my entire psyche. I'm a 42-year-old woman. My husband Luke is 43, and so is Amy. I met Luke in college, but he's known Amy since they were about 7. They did everything together and understood each other implicitly. They were best friends. They've always insisted, that they are surrogate siblings to each other. Naturally, I, as a new girlfriend, felt a little threatened by Amy and her closeness to Luke, but they both reassured me I had nothing to worry about, that their bond was not romantic and had never been sexual, that Amy really was just the sister that Luke never had. I believed them, and it didn't take long for me to forget any and all insecurity I had about Amy. She became my friend too. She officiated our wedding. Luke and I have built a wonderful life together, and we always had a strong relationship. After we got married and moved in together, we still saw a lot of Amy, and I was fine with that. I've passed many a night on the town trying to help Amy find a man, as she has always lamented how she is unlucky in love. Luke and I started to have children after we were married, and at around the same point, so did Amy. For further context, my children are Sophie, 15, Owen, 12, Louise, 10, and Carter, 6. Amy's children are Tom, 17, Kaylee, 14, and twins, Adam and Jenna, 9. Now, Amy was not in a relationship at this point. She was not married. As far as I knew, she was dating, but not consistently. As Luke and I had more kids and our family grew, periodically Amy would find herself pregnant as well. It happened a few times, and Luke and I never knew anything about the fathers in question. I kind of assumed that maybe Amy was sleeping around and not keeping in contact with her one-night stands. Luke agreed this was probably the answer. While I did ask each time if Amy knew the paternity, she always said no, and she didn't seem that worried about the idea of raising kids on her own, so I didn't pester her. Of course, she had us to support her, so there was that. While Amy never asked for any help, of course Luke was never going to let his best friend struggle to stay afloat when she had children to raise. Financially, we are very fortunate and privileged. I have a job that pays handsomely, and Luke also had wealthy parents who already knew and loved Amy, so they were happy to provide for her. My in-laws defy all stereotypes. They are the kindest and gentlest people. So we were able to support Amy, to get her somewhere to stay with her kids. People might be tempted to call her a leech, but I never saw it that way. None of us did. She needed help, and we could provide it. I also know people are going to criticize her for her lack of responsibility and question why she never used more reliable birth control. Honestly, that is a long story that I don't want to get into, because even I don't fully understand her reasoning. But it was quite important to her that she never be on birth control, and that whatever came of that choice, she would accept. It wasn't religiously motivated, I know that, but it was that degree of significance to Amy. She really did not want to take birth control. She's explained it to me more than once, but I'm still not clear on why. Of course, Amy being Luke's best friend since they were kids, it's not unreasonable that sometimes they hang out together while I'm not there. Hey, that's fine. Sometimes I hang out with Amy one-on-one as well, though Luke does it more. She was his friend first. This included him going over to where she was staying, and at times, sleeping over there. Was I a fool to trust him and believe nothing was going on? Perhaps. But for years, they presented as being buddies, like siblings. I didn't pick up on any vibes between them, not ever. As one can expect, our children were brought up together. Not in the same house. Our home is decently sized, but even we don't have the room for 8 kids. But we made sure Amy's children met ours from a young age, and they always got along, and strong bonds of friendship have formed over the years, which is good, especially if I'm right, and they share blood. I've been dawdling getting to the main point. Yes, I have come to suspect that Luke fathered at least one of Amy's kids, if not all of them. Frankly, I do suspect they are all his. I would never have believed my husband to be capable of such a thing, and he's given me no indication that he is the unfaithful sort. But he does spend a lot of time with Amy, and I have to confess I cannot remember seeing her with any real boyfriend over the years. She would talk to men at bars and parties. I would try to be her wingman and so on. But nothing ever seemed to really happen, so when she got pregnant the first time, I was curious. When it happened again and again, I began to wonder if she had some sort of secret fella who she didn't want us to know about for whatever reason. but I couldn't think of any reason why she would hide him, especially from her children. After Carter, our youngest, was born, Luke and I agreed that the time had come for him to have a vasectomy. Amy's twins had come just a couple of years prior. Of course, after the procedure, Luke and I continued to make love, but I no longer had to think about pregnancy. Meanwhile, Amy never got pregnant again after the twins. Is it a coincidence that Luke had a vasectomy and then both of us stopped getting pregnant? I don't know. But Luke would still visit her, and he wasn't just going to see her, but checking up on her children as well. In general, I should have paid more attention to it sooner, but Luke has always acted like a father to them, especially as they've gotten older. He's the father they never had. He doesn't neglect me or our children, not one bit. He's doing double duty. On its own, the idea that he is a surrogate father to Amy's fatherless children isn't inherently suspicious. One could call it noble, but it combines with a lot of other little things. There is appearance as well. I won't go into specifics of hair color, eye color, or unique physical traits, because I'd rather limit the identifying factors of the people involved and keep this whole thing as vague as possible. But suffice it to say, Amy's children, they certainly look like they could be Luke's. Kaylee has a very unusual allergy that Luke also has. The twins look very much like him, Adam in particular. The older Tom has gotten, the more of Luke I can see in his face and personality. While their race doesn't matter, the reality is that Luke is a different race than Amy, and Amy's children look pretty biracial. I could easily believe their father is the same race as Luke. Doesn't mean Luke has to be the father, but it sure seems like it. I have never voiced my anxieties to either Amy or Luke. I don't want to be the bad guy, and guilty or innocent, I already know they would flatly deny my accusations and be hurt by them. Imagine if that drama reached the ears of my kids, or Amy's kids. Either way, Luke continues to spend time with Amy and her children, just as her children spend time with mine. I have hinted to Luke that I feel needy for more attention, and wish he wouldn't give as much to Amy. But he either missed my cues, or pretended that he missed them. I don't want to push this idea that he's favoring her, because it's not even really true. He's never neglected me for her. I can't shake the feeling that Luke and Amy have been intimate before, likely numerous times. So far as I know, Amy never really wanted to be a mother either. She wasn't opposed to it, and when each of her children came into the world, she instantly fell in love with them. But motherhood was never really a major part of her life plan or identity. In the grand scheme of things, when we would talk about the future, she would sometimes mention a husband and children, but it never seemed like something she had her heart particularly set on. So I don't think this is a case of Luke just giving Amy children. I doubt that was the motive for the infidelity. That would have been a side effect. I've been letting this go and turning a blind eye for years. It was a dark thought in the back of my mind after Kaylee's allergy was discovered, but I dismissed it. Got worse after the twins were born. I dismissed it. Then when Amy stopped having babies, I wanted to feel reassured by that. But Luke had gotten a vasectomy, so if anything, that made my anxiety worse. There have been nights that I wish the twins were younger, that they had come along after Luke's procedure. It's been twisting me into knots for a long time, but I don't want to be the one who rips our family apart, especially since, technically, I could be wrong. Except now, I'm very afraid, because in the last few months we've had a new development in our kids' social circle. Tom, Amy's eldest, asked Sophie out. Sophie, my eldest, she's really blossomed over these last few years and become quite the outspoken beauty, so I'm not shocked to see she's getting male attention. But Tom asking her out had me thrown. Sophie said no, but only because I'm quite protective when it comes to her exploring dating, and she knew she'd have to ask me first. I could tell she was flattered and intrigued by his interest and wanted to say yes. She approached me to talk to me about it. Bless my girl, she did everything right. I think she expected I would see things her way and agree that she could date Tom. Much to her surprise, I very firmly said no. That caused a bit of conflict. She didn't even want to date him that badly. She just couldn't understand why she wasn't allowed to. And I couldn't explain it to her. All I could come up with was, he's too old for you, which he is, but it's not really about that. When Amy and Luke heard, I was so very curious to see what their reactions would be. If either of them had agreed with Sophie and tried to convince me that the two of them should be allowed to date, I think I would have been relieved and taken that as proof that I was wrong about something going on between them, wrong about who fathered Amy's children. But the ambiguity continued. They took my side. Both of them put their foot down, though not as fiercely as I did. Luke agreed with me, but he also worried that trying to forbid such a romance would only make Sophie want it more. He's probably right about that. Amy seemed more apathetic to the idea. She didn't want Tom to date Sophie either, and she backed me up, but I don't know. She just wasn't taking it as seriously. She seemed to think it was a fleeting crush. Well, it wasn't. In the months following those conversations, Tom would spend more and more time with Sophie. They would be alone or with other friends, anytime they possibly could. It's become abundantly clear that Tom is crazy about Sophie and wants to be with her. And he definitely wants to be physical. I've been watching them like a hawk and noticed his eye wandering many times. And while I'm doing everything I can to kill this budding romance in the crib, I also am feeling somewhat powerless. Sophie hasn't outwardly defied me. She's still just hanging out with Tom as friends. So forcing them to stop spending time together would be unreasonable and probably encourage more sneaking around. But I'm so afraid that they're already doing that. My nightmare is that they're secretly dating and doing God knows what when no one is looking. I've observed Tom being rather handsy with Sophie, and she presents no objection whatsoever. And I just don't know what to say. I had considered trying to convince Sophie that Tom is like her brother, but if she doesn't see him that way, I don't really have the power to rewrite their emotional dynamic or the history of their friendship. I always saw Amy and her children as being like family, but my kids might see Amy's kids more as best friends. The problem is, of course, that if my husband has indeed been carrying on an affair over the years and I'm right about the paternity of Amy's children, then Tom and Sophie cannot be anything more than friends under any circumstances. End of discussion. It can never happen. I feel powerless to stop it, though. Luke has apparently talked to Tom about this, as has Amy, but he is unrelenting and he won't give up on Sophie. I think she enjoys that attention and devotion. Tom has also confronted me and asked why I'm so against this when I know him very well, and I know he would be good to Sophie. I didn't know what to say, other than to fall back on her being too young for him. But that won't work forever. If, God forbid, they're still attracted to each other in a few years, then they'll pursue this with abandon, and once they're legal adults, there's nothing I can do about it. Amy and Luke agree with me that Tom cannot date Sophie, but that's all they've really done. They feel just as powerless as me to prevent teen love. It genuinely feels sometimes like they've just given up and will bury their heads in the sand about this. Just do nothing and hope the feelings pass as Tom and Sophie get older. Which, yeah, they're in high school. It's unlikely Tom will be in love with Sophie forever. But my fear is that she'll let him do something intimate with her before that time comes, something neither of them can take back. I am this close to opening a door I cannot close, this close to screaming at Luke that all this wouldn't be happening if he hadn't cheated on me these many years. If he hadn't been all but raising a second family with his surrogate sister behind my back. Now Luke's son wants to get with our daughter, his actual sister, because as far as he knows, she's just his childhood friend, and it's all Luke and Amy's fault for what they've done. If I speak up, everything gets blown to hell. On the off chance that I am wrong, I'm a horrible monster who accused the love of my life and one of my closest friends of doing something horrible. If I'm right, it still tears our entire structure apart. The family and social unit we've become over the last several years is gone, and everyone will be stressed and upset even if Luke and I don't divorce. If I do nothing, Sophie's eventually going to sleep with Tom and be his girlfriend, and I'm low-key terrified it will happen sooner than later. Or worse, that it's already happened under my nose. I hope to hell this relationship fades as they mature. But what if it doesn't? What if they wind up being together for years? What if they marry, want to get pregnant someday? And if I tell Sophie the truth about Amy's kids, then everyone else finds out too, and that's going to ruin so many lives. It would shatter my kids' perception of their father and their Aunt Amy. Luke is Owen's hero. I don't even want to think about how much this would hurt him. And what about Amy's children? They are innocent. They didn't ask for this. They don't control where they came from, and I don't want to hurt them. Admittedly, I'm not happy with Tom at the moment. A week ago, I saw him put his hand on Sophie's butt, and I wanted to knock his teeth out. But even he doesn't deserve to be burdened by the knowledge that it's his half-sister he's been fantasizing about. It's all so messed up, and I don't know what to do. I've been looking the other way and letting my husband and his best friend insult me for such a long time now. I thought I could live with it. But this business with Tom and Sophie has me distressed. I hate my life, I hate my kid, and I resent everyone who convinced me to have a family. I hate my life, I hate my kid, I resent my family, I resent my in-laws, I resent my wife, and above all, I hate myself. When I was younger, I never had any desire to have kids. I wasn't one of those people who vehemently opposed parenthood, but it was never something I actively wanted. My answer to the question was always, maybe one day, maybe not, and that was enough for me. My wife knew this about me from the beginning. When we were engaged, I told her the truth. Maybe one, definitely not more. For a while, that answer seemed to suffice. Life moved along, and we were happy just the two of us. Then, as the years passed, I watched as my friends started having kids. At first, I was indifferent, but the more I saw what parenthood entailed, the more I leaned heavily against having children. Sure, some parents had great kids, well-behaved and sweet, but for every easy child, there were just as many difficult ones. Even the good kids seemed like a lot of work. Endless diapers, sleepless nights, temper tantrums, and constant demands. I knew then, without a doubt, that being a parent wasn't for me. Then, tragedy struck. My wife's sister passed away unexpectedly. It was a devastating loss for the entire family, and understandably, it shifted my wife's perspective on what truly mattered. All of a sudden, family became her #1 priority. She talked about legacy, about the importance of continuing the family line. I got that. I understood why, after losing her sister, she would feel this overwhelming desire to create something permanent, something lasting. I could see why she wanted kids. But I didn't. At this point, I was firm in my decision. My answer was no to kids. Not just a soft maybe anymore, but a clear, hard no. I didn't want the responsibility, the pressure, or the loss of freedom. I saw what kids did to relationships, how they drained energy, how they consumed lives. It wasn't for me, and I was sure of it. But my wife wouldn't let it go. She pushed, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same topic. Kids. I tried to stand my ground, but every time she brought it up, I felt the pressure building. I loved my wife, and I didn't want to be the reason she was unhappy or unfulfilled. Eventually, after what felt like endless conversations and emotional pleas, I caved. The tipping point? The promise that changed everything. My in-laws, my wife's parents, jumped into the conversation. They made all these promises, how they'd help, how they'd sell their ranch and move down the street from us so that they could be close by. They said they'd be involved, hands-on grandparents, and that I wouldn't have to give up my entire life to raise a child. My wife and her parents painted this picture of family bliss, where they'd do the hard stuff, where I'd just be the dad, providing and playing a role that sounded more like something out of a 1950s sitcom. I wouldn't have to deal with the day-to-day chaos. They had it all covered. They convinced me. I was an idiot for letting them. I was so naive to think that it would work out the way they promised. But at the time, it sounded reasonable. Her parents were in their 50s, healthy, and full of energy. They swore they'd be there every step of the way, even beyond the baby phase, to help with whatever we needed. I caved. I agreed to have a kid, and I regret it more than anything else in my life. Fast forward 11 years, and here I am, trapped in a life I despise, married with a child who makes my life miserable every single day. My son has been diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. For those unfamiliar, it's just a fancy term for a kid being an asshole. He's defiant, cruel, and seems to take pleasure in causing chaos. There's nothing else wrong with him, no communication issues, no sensitivity to stimuli, nothing that would make you think he behaves this way because of something he can't control. He's just mean. The diagnosis basically confirms what I already knew. My kid is vindictive. He seeks conflict just for the sake of it. And no, this isn't some lack of discipline or bad parenting issue. I've read every book, gone to every parenting class, shelled out thousands upon thousands of dollars for therapy, behaviorists, and counselors. You name it, we've tried it. And yet, here we are, 11 years later, with a kid who continues to act out in ways that leave me seething with anger and frustration. And remember those promises my wife's parents made? The ones about how they'd be there, how they'd help us raise this kid they so desperately wanted? Yeah, well, that was a lie. They bailed almost immediately. When our son started showing signs of being difficult, throwing tantrums, being stubborn, acting out, they quickly realized he wasn't the sweet, easy grandchild they'd envisioned. For the first few years, they helped a little, but by the time he was 5, they had completely washed their hands of him. They see him once a month, maybe, and that's only if we force the issue. They don't want to deal with him. He's too much for them, too much energy, too much defiance, too much everything. So now, instead of the village they promised, it's just me and my wife, struggling to keep our heads above water while raising a kid who seems hell-bent on making our lives miserable. The worst part is, I can't blame anyone but myself. I let them convince me. I knew I didn't want kids, and yet I let myself be swayed. Now I'm paying the price, and so is my son, in a way. Because deep down, I know that part of the reason he's so defiant, so angry, is because I never wanted him in the first place. I've tried to hide it, to be a good dad. But kids can sense these things. They know when they're unwanted. And now I'm stuck in a life I never wanted, with a kid I can barely tolerate. I hate saying that. I hate even thinking it. But it's the truth. I feel trapped in this endless cycle of resentment, frustration, and regret. Every day feels like a battle, and I'm losing. I can't even stand to be in my own house half the time. Tonight was the breaking point. After another long day at work, I came home, hoping for just a few moments of peace before the usual chaos started. But the moment I walked through the door, I could sense something was off. My son was standing by the front window, glaring out into the street. He had that look on his face, the one that told me he was already angry, already looking for a reason to lash out. "What's going on?" I asked, already exhausted. "They took my package," he snapped, pointing to the neighbor's house. "My Amazon package got delivered to their house this morning, and they didn't give it to me until now." I sighed. It was a mistake. They didn't take your package on purpose. You have it now, so what's the problem? He just glared at me, his face twisted with anger. They waited all day to give it to me. They knew it was mine, and they didn't bring it over until after dinner. They wanted to mess with me. I tried to reason with him, to explain that the neighbors probably hadn't even realized the package was his until later in the day, but he wasn't having it. In his mind, they had wronged him, and he wanted revenge. That's when I saw it. He had spit on the neighbor's door handle, not just once, but multiple times. He was standing by the window, watching to see when they would come out and touch the handle, completely unfazed by the fact that what he was doing was wrong. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, unable to contain my frustration. He turned to me with that defiant smirk I've come to know all too well. "I want them to get sick," he said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "They deserve it for messing with my package." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, and before I could stop myself, I was yelling. I told him to clean it up, to apologize, to stop acting like a complete psychopath. But instead of listening, instead of even acknowledging that what he had done was wrong, he just stormed off, slamming the door to his room behind him. I stood there, shaking with rage. I couldn't believe that this was my life, that this was my kid. How had things gotten so bad? How had I ended up here, in this constant state of conflict, of anger, of hopelessness? But it didn't end there. Of course, it didn't. A few minutes later, I heard him stomping around upstairs. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of liquid hitting the floor. I ran upstairs and found him in the attic, standing over a box. My box. The one thing I had left from my parents, who both died when I was young. A single banker's box filled with memorabilia, photos, and keepsakes. And he was peeing on it. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, watching in horror as he destroyed the only tangible connection I had to my parents. When he was finished, he looked up at me with that same defiant expression, like he knew exactly what he had done and didn't care. He had done it on purpose. He had done it to hurt me. I don't remember what I said. I don't even remember how I got out of the house. All I know is that the next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car, parked in the lot of a dark, empty park. I had left. I had just walked out and driven away, unable to deal with it for one more second. I don't know if I'm going back. Part of me doesn't want to. As I sit here in the silence of my car, the reality of my situation weighs down on me like a ton of bricks. I'm 45 years old, crying in a parking lot because my life has spiraled so far out of control that I don't even recognize it anymore. I'm filled with rage, regret, and this deep, gnawing sadness that I can't shake. I blame myself for all of it. I should have stood my ground. I should have trusted my instincts and never agreed to have a child. I knew deep down that I wasn't cut out for this, that I didn't want this life, but I let myself be convinced. I let my wife, her parents, and the idea of some perfect, happy family push me into something I never wanted, and now I'm paying the price. But it's not just me. My son is paying the price too. He didn't ask to be born into this mess. He didn't choose to have parents who never truly wanted him. And as much as I resent him, as much as I hate what my life has become because of him, I know it's not his fault. Not entirely. He's just a kid, a product of the environment we created for him. And I failed him. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could be a good dad even if I didn't want kids. That I could fake it. That I could learn to love the role. But I was wrong. I've been going through the motions for 11 years, trying to be the dad I'm supposed to be, but I never truly committed. And kids know. They always know when they're unwanted. And that's the part that haunts me. I never truly wanted my son, and I think, deep down, he knows it. It doesn't matter how many times I've tried to hide my resentment, how many times I've tried to be the good dad I thought I could fake. Kids sense these things, and my son sensed it from the beginning. Maybe that's why he's so angry, so defiant. Maybe that's why he goes out of his way to hurt me, to test me. He knows I don't want to be here, that I never did. I've spent years in therapy, hoping that somehow it would change things, hoping that it would make me a better father, a better husband, a better person. I've poured money into behaviorists, counselors, parenting classes, anything that promised even the smallest glimmer of hope. But no matter how many books I read, no matter how many professionals we consulted, nothing seemed to make a difference. The anger, the defiance, the constant conflict, it never stopped. It never even slowed down. If anything, it got worse with time. Every day feels like a fight to get my son out of bed, a fight to get him to go to school, a fight to get him to do the most basic things like brushing his teeth or eating dinner. Everything is a battle, and I'm tired. I'm so So tired. I've been fighting for 11 years, and I don't know how much longer I can keep going. And the worst part? My wife and her parents, the ones who promised they'd be there, the ones who swore they'd help, they're nowhere to be found. My wife tries, but she's just as exhausted as I am, and her patience wears thin faster and faster each day. We've grown apart over the years, slowly but steadily. The tension between us is palpable, but neither of us has the energy to address it. It's easier to just coexist in silence, focusing all our attention on managing the chaos our son creates, rather than dealing with the issues in our marriage. As for her parents, the ones who promised to be the village we needed to raise this child, they're gone. Oh, they're still physically around, living just down the street like they said they would, but they haven't been involved in our lives for years. When our son started showing signs of being difficult, throwing tantrums, hitting other kids, acting out, they slowly distanced themselves. They didn't want to deal with it. He was too much for them, and they made excuse after excuse until eventually they stopped offering help altogether. The people who convinced me to have this child, the ones who swore they'd be there to help, bailed the moment things got hard. And I'm left to pick up the pieces. I'm left to deal with the fallout of a decision I never truly wanted to make, with no support from the people who pushed me into it in the first place. There are days when I wonder what my life would have been like if I had stood my ground. If I had said no and stuck to it. Maybe I'd be happy. Maybe I'd be living the life I wanted, free from the constant stress, the endless arguments, the feeling of being trapped in a life that isn't mine. But I didn't say no. I caved. I let my wife, her family, and the pressure of societal expectations push me into a role I never wanted, and now I'm stuck. There's no going back. I made my bed, and now I have to lie in it. Except, I don't know if I can anymore. As I sit here in my car, staring out at the empty park, I feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The exhaustion, the resentment, the regret. It's suffocating. I feel like I'm drowning in it, and no matter how hard I try to fight my way to the surface, I just keep sinking deeper and deeper. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can go back to that house, back to that life. The thought of walking through the door and facing my son after what he did tonight makes my stomach churn. The idea of trying to parent him, to be a father to a child who seems to hate me as much as I resent him, feels impossible. And it's not like I haven't tried. I've tried everything. I've read every parenting book, tried every technique, and poured every ounce of energy I had left into trying to make things work. But nothing has changed. Nothing has gotten better. And now I'm 45 years old, sitting alone in a parking lot, crying because I don't know how to fix the life I've ruined. I don't want advice. I've heard it all before. You need to discipline him more. You need to be more patient. Have you tried therapy? I've heard it all, and I've tried it all. None of it has worked. None of it has changed anything. This isn't about bad parenting or a lack of discipline. This is just my life, and it's miserable. Maybe I should have listened to my gut all those years ago. Maybe I should have trusted myself when I said I didn't want kids. But I didn't. I let other people convince me that I could do it, that I could be a good dad, that everything would be fine, and now here I am, paying the price for my weakness. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll go back to that house tonight, or if I'll sit here in this parking lot until the sun comes up. All I know is that I feel lost, broken, and filled with regret. I've lost control of my life, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get it back. The silence in the car is deafening, and the weight of my thoughts presses down on me harder than ever. I've always thought that with time, things would get better, that maybe, just maybe, my son would grow out of this defiant phase, and we'd finally reach some semblance of normalcy. But here we are, 11 years in, and nothing has changed. If anything, it's only gotten worse. And now, I'm left wondering how much more I can take before I completely break. There's a part of me that feels guilty for even thinking these things. What kind of parent admits that they hate their own child? What kind of father drives away from his house because he can't stand to be around his family anymore? I've always imagined that good parents, real parents, don't feel this way. They don't sit in parking lots late at night, crying over the life they chose. They love their kids unconditionally, no matter how hard things get. But that's not me. That's never been me. I resent my son, my wife, my in-laws, and most of all myself. I resent everyone who convinced me that this was the right choice, that this was the path I was supposed to take. I resent the fact that I let them talk me into it, that I didn't have the courage to stand up for what I really wanted. I resent the way my life has turned out, and I hate that I'm stuck in a situation I can't change. But deep down, I know that the real blame lies with me. I was weak. I let myself be pushed into a life I never wanted, and now I'm paying the price. My son didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask to be raised by a father who never truly wanted him. It's not his fault that I resent him. It's mine. I created this mess, and now I have to live with it. I think about all the times I've tried to make things work, all the effort I've put into trying to be a good father, despite how I really feel. I think about the times I've pushed down my resentment, forced myself to smile, to play the part of the doting dad. But no matter how hard I've tried, it's never been enough. My son knows. He's always known. Maybe that's why he acts out the way he does. Maybe that's why he's so angry, so defiant. He's angry at the world, and he's angry at me. He knows I don't love him the way a father should love his child, and that knowledge has shaped him into the person he is today. He's lashing out because he's hurt, because he's been raised in a home where he's never truly been wanted. And as much as I want to blame him for everything, I know that part of his behavior is on me. I created this environment. I set the stage for this nightmare. And now, I don't know how to fix it, or if it can even be fixed. I think back to when I first agreed to have a child, how everyone promised that it would be worth it, that the love I'd feel for my kid would outweigh the sacrifices, how they said being a parent was the most rewarding thing in the world. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that somehow I'd feel that same connection, that same joy. But it never came. I never felt the overwhelming love that other parents talked about. Instead, I felt trapped. I feel like I've been trapped in this life for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't recognize the person I've become. I used to be happy, or at least content with the life I had before all of this. I used to have dreams, ambitions, a sense of purpose. Now all of that feels so distant, like it belongs to someone else, like I've lost myself in the endless grind of trying to raise a kid I never wanted. The guilt washes over me again, and I feel the tears threatening to return. I'm a failure, not just as a father, but as a person. I failed to stand up for myself, to live the life I truly wanted. I failed to create a healthy environment for my son. And now, I'm stuck in this limbo, unable to move forward, but too broken to go back. I know I'll eventually have to go home. I'll have to face my wife, my son, and the life I've created. But right now, I can't. Right now, I just need to sit here in this parking lot and let the silence surround me. I need to mourn the life I thought I'd have and come to terms with the reality I'm living. Maybe tomorrow I'll have the strength to face it all again. Maybe tomorrow I'll be able to go home and pretend, at least for a little while longer, that I can do this, that I can keep going, even though every part of me wants to run. But for tonight, I'll sit here in the dark and try to make sense of the mess my life has become. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find the courage to start over, to figure out what I really want, and to finally stop letting other people dictate the course of my life. But for now, I'll just sit here, in the dark, in the silence.
My friend's girlfriend is accusing me of having a baby with him, which is absolutely ridiculous. I had this friend who used to have a very strong crush on me but never confessed. It was very obvious to everyone around. We were teenagers, grew apart, dated other people, and made our own lives. He moved to another state and has a long-term girlfriend, and I have been married to my husband for almost 6 years now, with 2 beautiful babies, and I'm currently pregnant. My friend, or former friend, I should say, and I barely talk. The last time we had a conversation was when my youngest was born, and he texted me saying, "Congratulations." I replied with thanks, and that was literally it. My husband knows about him and the crush he had on me. They've met because we are part of the same group of friends, and we've met his girlfriend too. There's no problem with that. I don't reach out to him. All of our conversations before the last one were initiated by him, and they're always like, "Hello, how are you?" "Good. And you?" And that's it. I don't always reply. My husband's family owns a small coffee shop, and my former friend knows about it. I spend part of my afternoons there while I wait for my daughter to finish her activities. My Emil and Sil are often there, and my 3-year-old son and I stay with them for a couple of hours. So, last Friday, I was surprised to find my former friend and his girlfriend at the coffee shop. They had rented a space there for a week since he came back to our city to do some photography and video work. He's a visual artist. Part of his team was with them. It was weird, but not a big deal. We crossed paths at the shop, and we all greeted each other. They didn't know I was pregnant, and he looked kinda shocked, to be honest, which was weird and made me uncomfortable because he started acting as if he was nervous. They hadn't met my son before. This was the first time they saw him, and although he didn't really pay much attention to him, his girlfriend did. Honestly, it all made me feel really uneasy, especially when she started staring at my son so much that it gave me chills. My Sil noticed it too, without even knowing who she was. I was texting my husband about it and decided to leave the place. My husband and I talked about it that night. He tried to give it a logical explanation, said it was odd, but maybe he chose the coffee shop because it felt familiar, and he said maybe the girlfriend wants to have kids herself, which is why she was staring so much. Anyway, I decided not to go back until they left the coffee shop for good. They rented it for an entire week. He said he could ask his mom to kick them out, but I didn't want to because it wouldn't be fair to her bussiness. That night, she tried to contact my husband through the coffee shop's Instagram, asking if he was sure our son was really his. That was literally the only text she sent. "Are you really sure that baby is yours?" The text was sent around 3 a.m. A bit later, she wrote, "He doesn't look at all like you." So it seems like this woman started spiraling, thinking that my husband's and my son is actually her boyfriend's. She described how our baby's hair is curly and light, but he has dark and straight hair. My natural hair is curly and light. He's my baby too. My husband has no access to the shop's account, so the next day we were woken up by a call from my Sil informing him about this. My husband is completely sure I never cheated on him because I never cheated on him. Look, we weren't even in the country when our son was conceived. My husband was sent out of the country for work for a few months, and we all went with him. This is nuts. She said that 3 years ago the former friend traveled to our city alone, and she now understands why. I also got some texts from my former friend asking if I had told something to his girlfriend, like he was accusing me of something. Accusing me of what? Tell her what? At this point, I just gave my phone to my husband so he could deal with them. I also started receiving very nasty texts and voice notes from her, calling me horrible things. I wanted to just block both of them, but my husband thought it was better to keep the messages in case we needed to get the police involved. On the other hand, my husband replied to her first message and told her he is 100% sure our son is his and that she should take her insecurities elsewhere. She asked if we had done a paternity test, and he said we don't need to. She's now demanding we do a paternity test if we have nothing to fear. Direct texts from her addressed to me have decreased. I'm staying locked in the house with the kids because we're afraid this woman might do something, as she seems unhinged. Of course, they weren't allowed back at the coffee shop. My Emil also refunded their money because she doesn't want more problems and is beyond angry too. This is also so embarrassing, and I can't stop crying. I don't feel in physical danger because they don't know where we live, but I am so full of rage that I can't stop crying. I know this stress is not good for the baby I'm carrying. This morning, my former friend called me. My husband was still at home, so he answered the call. He said his GF does not believe anything he says and practically begged me to please do a paternity test so she can calm down. I already blocked them both. She's now using other accounts to comment on the coffee shop Instagram, offending me, saying that our baby is an affair baby and I should be ashamed. At this point, I am not even interested on making her understand. I just want her to stop. Update. As Sill's lawyer warned us, shit hit the fan pretty quickly. They received 2 cease and desist letters, one under IL's business and one from us. These were written by Sill's lawyer and delivered the same day, yesterday, as an emergency matter. I knew they were staying with one of our friends. As I mentioned in the comments on my last post, my husband met with a lawyer today. He will take our case and help us out. He also warned my husband that the girlfriend might get even crazier when she finds out we're taking legal action against them, and advised him to be ready for what might be coming. Until this point, my husband was a bit scared she might try to do something to our son or me, but deep, deep down, he didn't believe she was capable of causing us physical harm. Until now. At first, we talked about me and the kids staying locked at home until they go back to their hometown, but then we decided to keep our routines, with slight changes, mostly because our kids don't deserve to suffer the consequences of this woman's actions. Tuesday was all right and very calm, but today I was driving out of the garage to take our daughter to her dance lesson when the girlfriend crossed my path. I almost ran over her because I didn't see her. She wasn't screaming, but she was like, "Stop, stop, stop, stop!" I did scream, sorry for my little ones, but I couldn't help it. I froze because what the hell was she doing there? How the hell did she find out where we live? Our toddler was like, yeah, whatever. But our daughter was terrified. The GF moved to my side of the car, and I think she wanted to talk, but I really didn't pay attention and couldn't hear her because Moana was playing in the radio. My daughter was crying, my son was starting to freak out, and I just kept driving in reverse to get the hell out of there. Now I'm thinking about a bunch of things I could have done, but in the moment, it was all chaotic, and I just wanted to run away. I called the police when we were far from the house and went back a few minutes later. I was shaking. Then I called my husband, and I took our daughter to the rest of her classes so she could be distracted. It worked for her, but not for me. Jesus Christ. At least in the studio, we were safe and surrounded by people. I asked our mutual friends if they had given her or him our address, but everyone swears on their lives that they didn't. I believe them? Yesterday, they had a reunion to which my husband and I were invited, but we refused to go because it was meant to catch up with the former friend and his GF. She didn't show up, and our mutual friends told me the atmosphere was weird, to say the least. According to what they said, the former friend asked if I was coming, didn't ask about my husband, and kept discreetly bringing me up throughout the night. He only wanted to talk about this mess, asked if I was mad, and dared to say things could go back to normal if I were to do the test. He then proceeded to insult my husband, saying he was controlling me. Now listen, friends said maybe they misunderstood, but they think he implied my son could be his. I want to throw up. They shut him down because he was upsetting everyone and told him he was being lame, or so they say that's what happened. So, the reunion ended earlier than expected. We weren't there. But I am angry. My husband is extremely angry, saying if he sees him, he's going to beat the S out of him. I'm extremely worried for our son now. One of my female friends told me the girlfriend texted her, asking if the former friend was actually at the reunion with them and requested proof, to which my friend refused to send anything. I now realize it was around the same time she was messaging us on social media, insulting me and telling my husband how she was sure her BF was banging me. I can't with this level of disrespect. Mind you, I was in my pajamas, lying on the sofa like a couch potato, watching TV with my husband at that moment, so joke's on her. It was hard for my husband not to reply, but we are following the lawyer's instructions. We will proceed to sue her for defamation. It is very easy to prove our son was conceived when we were out of the country, but if needed, we'll do the paternity test. Only if requested by the court, or if it helps to fix this sooner. We tried for a PO on Tuesday. We will try again to get one tomorrow, and after the girlfriend showed up at our house and we filed the police report, our lawyer says we will get it for sure as an emergency resource. Legally, she can't visit the coffee shop either. We're staying at my Sill's place tonight. None of my friends know we're here, And they don't even know where she lives. The kids are all right. They know something is going on, but they seem to be at peace. Our daughter was back to normal after her dance lessons. She is excited because she gets to have a sleepover with her cousin. Our son was mad because he misses his bed. Yeah, buddy, I'm not buying it. It's the same bed where it's so hard to put him down, LOL. He gets to sleep with Mom and Dad tonight, though I don't think I'll be able to sleep. My husband is out installing a Ring camera at our house, just in case he, or both show up. His dad is helping him, so he's not alone, but I will feel more in peace when he comes back to us. We decided I'm staying here with our son tomorrow. I work from home, so it's not a problem for me. My husband will take and pick up our daughter from school. I'm not scared anymore, but I really am. I'm mostly very angry at both of them, but I am remaining calm for my baby. I'm just focusing on the fact that we are safe at the moment, and that's working to ease my mind. Once my husband gets back to us, I'll be totally at peace. Right now, all I want to do is cry and be with my husband and our kids. Sil, Mill, and my mom keep telling me it's like a stress release, and hormones are making it way worse for me. It's Wednesday. They're supposed to leave on Friday or Saturday IDK, but during this weekend, or that's what we assume, not having them physically near us will be a great relief. I just want this to end.